Today, we're going to dig into a pretty significant presidential directive, Executive Order 14303. Its title, Restoring Gold Standard Science. So let's break down what that actually means. Right off the bat, this brings up two really important questions. First, what is gold standard science? And second, what problem is so big that it needs an executive order to fix it? Here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start with the crisis the order claims is happening, then look at the gold standard solution it proposes. After that, we'll cover the new rules, the old policies it's rolling back, and finally, the big picture of what all this changes. Okay, first things first, the why. Every executive order has a reason behind it, and this one starts by claiming there's a serious crisis of confidence in science. So right at the top, the order makes a pretty bold claim. It says that public trust in science has dropped a lot. And it argues the federal government itself has actually played a part in that loss of trust. And here's where it gets really specific. It's not just some vague statement. The order points a finger directly at federal agencies, accusing them of pushing scientific information that it calls highly misleading. To back this up, the order actually points to three specific cases. It mentions the CDC's guidance on schools during the COVID-19 pandemic. It calls out the National Marine Fishery Service for using what it called a worst-case scenario for whale populations that it admitted was probably wrong. And finally, it critiques several agencies for using a climate change model based on what it describes as highly unlikely assumptions. Okay, so that's the problem on the table. What about the solution? Well, that's where this new framework, the gold standard, comes in. Let's see what that's all about. So what is gold standard science? Well, according to this order, it's less about getting a certain result and more about how you get there. It's all about being transparent, making sure other scientists can reproduce your work, being collaborative, and even being a little skeptical of your own findings. And, of course, unbiased peer review is a huge part of it. And they break this down into 9 key principles. You've got the ones you'd expect, like being reproducible and transparent, but there are some really interesting ones in here too, like being upfront about errors and uncertainty, accepting that a negative result is still a valid result, and having 0 conflicts of interest. Now, the order is also super clear about what it calls scientific misconduct. And this is important. We're not talking about honest mistakes or disagreements. This is strictly about the big 3. Fabrication, which is making stuff up, falsification, which is changing the data, and plagiarism. Basically, it's about intentional cheating. This next idea, the weight of scientific evidence, feels like a direct response to those criticisms from earlier. Think of it this way. Not all studies are built the same, right? So this tells agencies they have to actually judge the quality and relevance of the science. Look at the study design, see if it can be replicated before they use it to make big decisions. Okay, we've got the definitions down. So how does this actually change things on the ground for federal agencies? What are the new rules of the road? Well, Section 4 lays out 4 big mandates. First up, transparency. Agencies have to release their data, their models, even the source code for important stuff. Second, they have to document any uncertainties. Third, they're told to avoid those highly unlikely worst-case scenarios we talked about. And finally, they have to use that weight of evidence approach for all their evaluation. And it puts the responsibility squarely on federal employees. The message is simple. You are not allowed to engage in scientific misconduct, and you can't knowingly use science that came from it. It's a very clear line. Now, this is where things get really interesting. This order isn't just about the future. It's also about the past. It actually rolls back recent policies and hits the reset button. And this is a really big deal. The order says that, starting right now, all federal agencies have to go back to using the scientific integrity policies that were on the books on one specific date, January 19th, 2021. So let's just walk through this timeline to see how significant this is. January 19th, 2021 becomes the new baseline. Everything reverts back to that day's standards. That means the entire 4-year period between then and when this order was signed is now under a microscope. It is, for all intents and purposes, a massive policy reset. And just to be clear, this isn't some polite suggestion. The order mandates that every single agency has to go back, look at all the scientific integrity policies they put in place over the last 4 years, and then either rewrite them to fit the new standard or just get rid of them entirely. All right, let's zoom out. After all that detail, what's the big picture goal here? What is this executive order really trying to achieve in the long run?
There's a quote in the order itself that really captures the mission. It says the goal is to restore a gold standard for science, to make sure that research is transparent, rigorous, and impactful. So, when you boil it all down, there are four main goals they're aiming for. The first is to restore public faith in science. The second is to make sure government decisions are based on solid evidence. And the last two are broader, to spark innovation and to maintain America's leadership in science and technology. And in the end, this whole thing really brings us back to a huge, fundamental question. This order offers one potential answer, but the challenge is always there for any government. How do you perfectly balance the pure, strict principles of science with the messy, fast-paced, and practical demands of making policy for millions of people?